Good afternoon. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Commissioner Dewey,
Present.
Commissioner Ellison,
Present.
Commissioner Gay,
Here.
Commissioner Hutter,
Here.
Commissioner Stewart,
Here.
Commissioner Stockdale,
Present.
Commissioner Strange,
Here.
Commissioner Davis here, and Chair Bryan.
Here. We have a full house. That's great. Welcome to everyone. We have a pretty busy agenda today, and the first item on the agenda, well, first of all, let me do this. We have a new city manager here, I believe. Would you like to come forward, please, sir, and say hello?
Thank you, Chairman Bryan. Commissioners, thank you so much for the ability to address you today. I really appreciate it. Like I said, it has been a whirlwind. I just sent another update to the Board of Commissioners on my last week and the previous week's activities. I will tell you this one, and something you already know. What a gem of a city you have. I hope you realize that one. Having lived all over the country, in about 13 different states and different all over the world, what an amazing community the city of Rehoboth Beach is. And I feel blessed to be a part of it. I was just sharing with young Alex in the back of the room there, like I'm on my way back west to celebrate the weekend with my son, who just turned 11 years old. So I'm gonna be on the road here. I just put my little paid time off on and be, loading up the truck here in just a little bit. But we are looking forward to getting our entire family established out here in Delaware. And so my father-in-law is eagerly awaiting that one as well. He and I are roommates, by the way. It's fantastic. I'm loving every minute of it. But I want you to know how excited we are to become part of the community, and what an amazing organization this is. Each and every day, I am excited to work with these professionals across the entire depth and breadth of the community. And I see the volunteerism before me. I don't think you realize what a unique situation you have here. This is amazing. I would be advertising for weeks and months to get one volunteer for one board. And we have people on the waiting list. So I thank you all for what you do each and every day. It's truly amazing and inspiring. But thank you, sir, for the ability to address
Thank you
the
for being
committee.
here.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, the first matter on the agenda is the project concept review pursuant to Section 23631 of the Municipal Code of the city for Atlantic Crowne Hotel to be located on lots 17, 19, 21, and 23 of Baltimore Avenue. Is the applicant present? Yes, sir. Mr. Savage?
This is where you want us, right here?
Yes, sir. Now, what we're going to do, we have an agenda that has some, it's pretty crowded. So could we possibly ask you to keep your presentation to 20 to 30 minutes?
That's plenty of time.
Good.
Yeah, that's way too long. This is
Okay.
This is not
That's
that
what I wanted to
detailed.
hear. Thank you.
I will definitely be less. He might be longer, but so can I get this on the board, Ann? How do I?
Are we having technical issues?
That's what it looks like.
Okay.
Well, I'll start.
I was going to say, can't you go ahead? I see you have some very nice elevations and whatnot.
Yeah, we brought
concepts.
some concepts that are on the other side. If anybody in the audience would like to take a look at that, sometimes it's easier to peruse those. So again, my name is Carlton Savage. I am representing Scaled Engineering as a site engineer on the project. I am also affiliated with Langford Ventures. Gene Langford being my wife's grandfather could not make it today. He is out of town, but we are going to continue on without him. He would like to have been here and given his input on the project. Obviously, it's his dream. It's what he's been focusing on for the last several years.
Can you pull the microphone a little closer to yourself?
Is that a little better? Okay. So without him here, I'll try to give our input on the project as well as describe it as best I can. This project, as you are well aware, came before Planning Commission a few years ago, and the project kind of stopped because of some FAR issues. We have a change of plans, and we are actually have purchased one more property. We have purchased a fourth lot on Baltimore Avenue, and this project has grown in size by 5,000 square feet. And with that, we have been able to take this project from 40 rooms up to 55 rooms, which we like. The current plan is for 55 rooms. It's going to be 43 rooms will be facing onto Baltimore Avenue with porches and balconies. There's another 12 rooms that are off the back side of the building, facing Maryland, that side. There are no balconies on the back side of the properties. We have stayed consistent with that to keep to be the best neighbor we can. There is some residential properties on the back side, so we're trying to keep in mind those properties. There are only 4 rooms on the first level. The first level will consist of a small hotel lobby. There's a restaurant and a elevator lobby to take you up and down through the building. So the plan is to keep the first level as beautiful as we can. Obviously, that's what you see the most from the street. We are trying to be 100% code compliant with this application. So we are not here today asking for any FAR variances. We are not here today for asking for any height variances. Obviously, we are still early in our design, but our plan as we stand here today is to ask for 0 variances and move through the process being 100% code compliant. That includes the balconies this time. So we now have an understanding what that means, and we are staying within it. So if you look at the plan, I know it's a little hard to see over there. Moving from left to right, you would enter the property on the very left side of the building, on the west side of the building, and kind of drive through an underground drop-off area. I don't know if you were given, I see some plans in front of you. Yep. Okay, this is much easier. So on the left side of the property, you can see where the little car's parked. That's a little drop-off space. That space will allow vehicles to drop off somebody who may be disabled or does not have ability to walk very far, as well as allow the circulation of traffic to move through that side of the building. Hang a right behind the building. You will drive underneath of a small section of rooms, and then you would continue on into the Atlantic Sands property. Should there be no parking on the ground level, I believe there's 14 parking spaces on the ground level, including 2 handicap spaces. If you did not have a parking space there, you would continue into the Atlantic Sands, down the ramp, circulate back underneath for another 41 parking spaces. So the plan right now is to keep 55 parking spaces on the property for 55 rooms, which would be code compliant. There are currently 8 parking spaces that are occupied by Celebration Mall across the street. Those would be relocated to the Atlantic Sands, and we would do the proper paperwork to do that. There is adequate spaces in the Atlantic Sands property to relocate those parking spaces. So you can see on the left side of that building, that's your lobby. There's some chairs, dining area, a little lobby bar. At the very north side of that picture is the elevator. And then on the far right are 4 first-level rooms. We have done our best to try to keep those rooms very appealing. First-level rooms aren't generally the most appealing rooms, but we have set them back quite a bit of distance from the roadway, and we are trying to make the best of the front area as sort of a garden. Now keep in mind, the underground parking creates for a big underground box, concrete box. So doing landscaping on the first level becomes fairly difficult. We are proposing to do some planters and some different things to allow some plants and to give you the visual look that you're seeing from the street. As the plan currently is, I'm here today with our architect, Peyton Bridge from Davis Bone and Friedel. He has some discussion related to those planters that he'll assist us with. As you move, and can you flip down a page? Yep. The second, third, and fourth levels of this building are all consistent. There are forward-facing rooms, and then the rear area on the back. That is your parking garage. So the parking garage, like I said, consists of 41 spaces. The elevator goes down to capture those spaces and makes the 2 handicap spaces on that level accessible to the upstairs, and both staircases go down to the basement. We talked about needing the ramp to get down to that space, and we talked about that last time. We discussed it, and basically with a permanent easement established for that use, we can guarantee that right now the properties are both in the same ownership, but moving forward, we'll have an easement established before approval that would guarantee that ability for both properties to share access. So keep going, Dan. Yep. So that's a good picture there that kind of shows that that driveway underneath of both the left side of the building as you enter the property, and underneath of the back portion of the building, which is overhanging that driveway space. But we do think that the flow of traffic is nice. That we created no dead ends into the back of the property. It could be a turnaround situation. We've done the best we can to take this rendering of the building to make a fairly aesthetically pleasing building as a code compliant building, which is tough. I think you guys have experienced that in the past and had quite a bit of discussion about staying inside the box generates a pretty ununique box. But we intend to put large windows here with visual, nice visual aspects. And to really try to keep with I know you guys are on the process of working on Baltimore Avenue right now and some streetscapes. We want this to be a part of that streetscape. We do feel that setting this building back, providing the streetscape, and moving forward with the look that you guys are wanting to see here, taking the couple of restaurants down that are there, the 2 fairly ugly parking lots, and turning it into something nice is what our goal is. That's kind of an overview. I'm going to turn it over to Peyton, who is the architect.
Excuse me, I have one quick question.
Sure.
Is the image on the bottom, is that the view from the boardwalk?
No, that view is from if you were standing west of the building, looking towards the Atlantic Sands.
All right.
So nobody's really going to see that view unless the building to the west of us was torn down. That view is not the prettiest one. We really focused on the front. If you go down one more, Ann, you should be able to see the view from the boardwalk. That's the back, and that's the view. That's the view from the boardwalk area. Similar, just we didn't put any windows on the other side. Not much to look at.
Any other members of the commission have any questions of Mr. Savage?
I will have some, but I'm assuming we want to hear,
Yeah.
we want to hear the architect first.
Yeah, I think he has a lot more detail than I do at this point. But.
Okay.
Peyton.
All right. Just talk a little bit about what we were trying to do there. And if you could, I guess, continue going down. There should be some more 3D images. Yeah, that's good. So what we're trying to do with this building and staying within the zoning is break up the scale of it along Baltimore Avenue. The other issue we have is the existing parking deck. To do the underground parking, that's going to have to continue over. So we'll end up being about 18 inches higher on the far end than the existing roadway. So we're going to have a little change in elevation to deal with there. So that's why we have been proposing these planters along the roadway in between the sidewalk and the actual property. If you look at the actual site plan, they do go across the property line currently, but we're hoping that we can work with the street development and work something in there, whether they're actually built in or whether they're temporary, or, you know, however we can deal with that, just because we're trying to dress up that change in elevation rather than just have a concrete drop off at the edge right beside the sidewalk there. So the planters also help break down the scale of the building along the street, and they help give some privacy to those first floor rooms. As Carlton said, they're not usually the most attractive rooms, but in this iteration, you would have your private patio surrounded by plantings, and I think that really adds a lot to the first floor rooms there. But for the, I think the only things that we're looking to do that aren't necessarily defined by the code, you've already touched on it, but the access from the sands down to the underground parking, the loading zone, and the garbage are on the adjacent property, just given the constraints of the lot itself. But everything else is within the lot coverage, it's within the FAR, and within the setbacks defined by the zoning code. So that's also one of the reasons why the top level doesn't have any covering over those balconies, because of that 30-degree setback. But we've really tried to break this up a bit. There's that center portion that kind of breaks it up, and that also serves a dual purpose of setting back to allow for our ADA accessible balconies there. So, but let's see if there's anything. But I mean, that's mostly it. So we really just wanted to get this before you today so we can start discussing moving forward if there's, you know, if there's any issues that y'all perceive that we should address immediately, or as we move forward with the design. As Carlton said, this is a preliminary concept design, so we still have quite a bit of work to do. I think one of the other things we wanted to touch on was the zoning code and access to the roof via the elevator. Currently, I don't believe we're allowed to have the elevator run up to the roof, but we would like to be able to do that, even if we have the elevator installed with key for mechanical access. Just being able to access the roof through the elevator for maintenance purposes, I think would be a big benefit. So we are proposing that. But you want to speak more about it? Yep.
Yeah, so as Peyton was saying, the roof, if we were to put any type of space up there, balcony or rooftop deck, that would all count towards the FAR. So we have avoided that with this plan. We will probably, when we design the rooftop slab itself, we will probably over-design it in case that changes in the future, but we don't intend to do anything with that now. The plan would be, as he was mentioning about the elevator, we would like to ask to take the elevator height, so it would be similar to what the staircases do, come up and be the same height, because owning a couple other properties in town, taking any kind of maintenance equipment, maintenance guys getting up to and from that area is pretty problematic. It's much easier to put equipment and things on an elevator, take it to the roof. Small equipment, not large. But some of the things, like we will have our air conditioners up there, and currently we're still working on the plan, but we're considering smaller, almost mini split type units where 3 or 4 rooms will be connected together with small equipment, because things are filling up in Rehoboth, and rooftop units are very tough to get to that are large. So it is something we might want to ask for as we get to the next level, if there is any concession to taking the elevator to the roof with some kind of lockout key for maintenance, but at least ability to get up there and move things up and down. But that's pretty much just conceptual at this point. I guess, given the time constraint, I'd entertain questions that you have now, concerns you have now. That way we can maybe address some at this point, or address them before we come back to you with an actual plan.
Yes, sir, Mr. Strange.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Excellent presentation. I just have two questions, one of which obviously you answered partially with regard to the commonality of the access way to the underground parking between the two properties. With regard to that, I'm assuming that these properties are going to are in separate deeds. The existing Atlantic Sands and this one are going to be separate because at some future point, we hope you stay here forever, but decisions they may end up being sold separately. To that extent, and I guess this ends up being a question ultimately for Glenn Mandelis, that if, depending on how the easement is written, it may require something more than that legally to make sure it's in perpetuity as long as these two hotels exist. Sure. So I would just put that out there. The second thing is, back to your question with regard to the rooftop, you're anticipating putting rooftop HVAC up there, or you're anticipating not? Because right now we don't see anything in the drawings that would reflect whatever that is.
Correct. So the plan right now is to have small rooftop units on the roof. They would be set back quite a bit away from the actual front of the building. So our intent, we don't want to see them from the streetscape.
Right, that's what I was leading up to, right?
When you start getting the larger units, you do start seeing them.
Right.
So we're trying to keep that as small as we can. My only discussion would be you're allowed to take one staircase to the roof, obviously for access. We view it as an elevator shaft could be very similar to that in shape and size, and being able to access it via elevator could be good for now and in the future. I mean, I know the current code does not allow us to be up there, but the plan would be everything changes. I know in a lot of towns, a lot of places, we have great views. We could have great views from a rooftop area, and I'm sure that's come up in other people's plans. It's just, given the size, we're trying to get this started, and if it's successful, possibly down the future, maybe those plans change. Maybe there is an ability to expand with some sort of rooftop, even if it's a go up there, see the fireworks type thing at some point. So that is something we may ask for, but it's not something we're asking for today.
Okay. The other question I have is with regard to the elevator is, one of the things that's very difficult under the code, under 270-5, is that construal of provisions, higher standards apply. And that means if there's a better standard out there, even though our code may call for something else, we should apply it for the future. And I noticed that is that a hydraulic system you're currently planning, or mechanical? Because it seems to be a little bit taller than it otherwise would be, even taking into account the fact that you'd like access to the roof.
It's currently a holeless hydraulic.
I'm sorry, what?
Currently a holeless hydraulic.
Okay. That's the only real concern I have from a visual standpoint. I mean, there are other ways that you could access the roof, as you're pointing out, and it wouldn't be needed, but then at some future date, you would require some modifications. I mean, the internal stairway can, in fact, be used with a large hatch system.
Absolutely.
But to your point, then it requires, if you have to transport the mechanicals up there, quite frankly, it's going to cost you more money.
Yeah. Yep.
How that plays into this, I'm not sure at this point, but I think the rest of it is looking very good.
Yeah. And general maintenance is also our concern. It's that rooftop area you have to restrict.
Right.
So there's things we do now to keep people off the rooftops, and our maintenance guys have to work around that constantly. So it's something we're considering. It's something that we may come up. It may not. So I appreciate that, and I definitely understand your comments.
Ms.
Thank you,
Gay.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I have first of all, it's an excellent presentation. Thank you. It's a very nice plan. I like it a lot. And thank you for mentioning the spaces that are allotted to Celebration Mall, because I was going to bring that up, and I actually thought there were only 4. You said there are 8 of them.
I believe there's 8. Yeah.
I mean, there were originally supposed to be 11, but I guess those hotel rooms weren't done at Celebration Mall, so you were actually only using 8. Is that it?
I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we have 4 units requiring 2 per. I'll verify that. And the reason we have
The Realty office too.
the realty office, I think, is commercial. I'm not sure they have any parking.
It's an office. They do.
Oh, they do?
It was a
Okay.
variance given in March of 2015 for 2 spaces.
Okay, so we will definitely look into that, and we have a parking calculation on the plan.
Well, that's actually what I was going to ask, because first of all, what is the Sands House? I saw your little chart with the various spaces, but some of them are allotted to Sands House versus Sands Hotel. What is the Sands House?
So the Sands House is what we call the White House, which is on Maryland Avenue before you approach the Sands. It's actually it's on the same deeded property as the Atlantic Sands.
But it's a different structure and
Different
has its own
structure.
parking.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And, well, here's the problem, because right now it says the existing Sands has 178 spaces. But for the proposed parking, the Sands will have 175 because some of those are going to be allotted for the Celebration Mall spaces. The problem is the Sands has 180 rooms. So I don't think you can go down because you're already grandfathered at a lower than code number of spaces.
I gotcha.
And it is 180 rooms, right?
I believe so. 180 rooms. Now, there is on the backside around the Sands house, all those spaces, there's 15 of them.
Yeah.
That's generally where a lot of our staff are, park.
How many rooms are in the house? Or how many?
It's a standard house.
So it only requires 2?
I think it's 2. Yep.
Okay, so let's see, that's right, because that's the current plan has 178 plus 2. The new plan is going to have 175 plus 15. If it only needs 2 for the house, then yes, you may be okay, because you can allot all of the celebration rooms there.
Yeah, I think our goal would be to sort of talk about all the parking, make sure we have enough.
Yeah.
And then it just happens that we have 55 rooms on this parcel, so we would allocate all 55 to this for
Right.
ease of understanding.
Well, as long as that the allotment for the Sands house includes all the ones for Celebration Mall, I think, but again, it's got to, the Sands has to maintain 178.
Correct. Yep. It looks like we're +2 right now. I'll check into that, the real estate office, and see that we might be even, which would be really close. And we are losing some spaces, I believe, because of the fire marshal on the east side of the new building. There is a 15-foot requirement to keep away, so that it's costing us parking spaces there. But we have lost in the Atlantic Sands over the years. Several rooms have been converted into things that are not hotel rooms. So we've lost quite a few. That's why we have extra. Our whole first level.
So you don't have 180 rooms anymore?
I have to check the total number, yeah. It's probably permitted for 180, but we've lost first level rooms. We have one room that had no access, so it's been converted into an office inside. Our general manager is in that room. So we may have to clean that up, I guess, as we go through and get it all reviewed and take a look.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Mr. Ellison.
Nice presentation. I appreciate both of you. But I do, just on parking, I do have a concern. You've answered. Is the ramping available now, or is that to be constructed on the Sands property to enable parking in
The ramp, if you look at that plan there, the top of that plan being the north side of this building, if you were to go straight to the right, there is a ramp that comes down already existing from the Atlantic Sands, and there's a whole underground parking for the Atlantic Sands property. You would go down that ramp, make the U-turn, head towards this property, and it would have access through that opening. We'll be cutting an opening in the wall, connecting the two, and basically making one uniform underground space under that area.
All right, that
And
answers.
we're staying within the confines of the code with, it makes it difficult. Some of the, I think, prior codes and things may have allowed for different things. This plan meets the intent of the lane widths and the parking spaces and all that, so.
All right, still on this plan, what is shown only very lightly on this plan, I have a copy of it here, is the fact that the structural columns that support the four-story hotel also come down into that space. And by my calculation, given the current configuration of parking, it knocks out 10 of your spaces. So you might want to address that, Peyton, but
Yeah, we show the columns coming down dashed in just for our sake at this point, but there would be the whole upper level of the deck would be a transfer slab. So those loads would be transferred over to the columns that are in the parking garage. So only the black shaded columns are the ones that are actually in the garage currently.
that's a pretty expensive operation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it can be.
All right. A larger issue for me, if you go to the first floor plan, is the fact that although your prose talks about trying to contribute to the redevelopment of the avenue and so forth, there is nothing that approaches the sidewalk other than the driveway up into the porte cochere, which is the only way into the hotel and into the eatery. Can you explain first, what is your intention for the eatery? In the prior plan from a couple of years ago, there was a full restaurant.
Yeah, we don't see the need, after we've reconsidered things, for a full, what I would say, a full large-size restaurant. This is a restaurant that would be nice to serve breakfast to our guests. It does have a small lobby bar for someone waiting for someone maybe to get in town. We want something really attractive, high-end looking to basically complement the hotel. Running a full-size restaurant is not our goal. It's not, the size of the kitchen here is not meant to support, we'll have full meals, but we won't have necessarily, like you're alluding to, bringing a lot of people in. We have been talking to the owner of Eden and Jam because they're obviously going to lose their space, and we hope they buy into this and make for a nice lunch spot, because I know they do a very good lunch, and basically keep with their restaurant style. We have talked to them, and they seem to be on board from what my understanding is, and we would entertain them sort of running this restaurant for us and staying with their plan. To allude to the walkway, so there's a handicap walkway that runs, it's sort of curved on the left side. It follows, that takes you into the front door. There is some elevation change there, which is why that looks the way it does. Peyton alluded to the fact that once you get on the far left of this property, there's about an 18-inch difference. So we've got to ramp up to get to that change, so that the building can be flat. Obviously, we'd like to not keep changes in the building, changes in the parking garage. We do have on this plan in front of the private patios, we didn't want those basically just being a concrete slab out to the street. We didn't feel that was very appealing. So we've created what we're calling like a garden walkway, which will connect the restaurant and the lobby through that space, through that landscape space, over to the right side of the property, which then connects to the sidewalk. And there is a set of steps that are about centralized of this plan that will take you also into that restaurant space from the street.
Looks like it takes you to the kitchen.
Well, yeah, it's concept. we really have to look at some of the elevation constraints too. This is a tough. It's not easy to put a big box straight across the property and get everything to work. But what we've done mainly is we really want, as you're riding down Baltimore, for this corner of the building as you're entering it to be the focal point. Once you get past it, you're at the beach. So our entryway is what we've really attenuated with this plan. But so you think some more walk to that restaurant would be a benefit? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it isn't a full-blown restaurant. You're taking out two and replacing it basically with none.
Yeah.
And just looking at the larger picture of the avenue, you have a couple of establishments at the corner of First. Then you're going to have this big slab of rooms without any entrance off of the sidewalk, other than the ramp up to the porte cochere. And then, of course, further than that, you've got the Sands, which has no presence either. And I'm concerned because the city is trying to redevelop the avenue, and I don't see this in its present form as really adequately contributing to that. I would love to have, frankly, I think the first floor ought to be an entrance to the hotel that's obvious, a restaurant that would be obvious, and maybe even a nice shop rather than more rooms. That's just, that would, I think, contribute a whole lot more to what I think the city is trying to do on that avenue. So that's just my comment.
Sure. I mean, we appreciate that. And as of right now, getting to the 55 room number is still tough to do. It's still a quaint boutique hotel. It's not a massively run hotel. If you notice, we've sacrificed a lot even with this plan. We're not intending any laundry services with this building, mainly because it's already tough to do that in the hotels that we own. So our plan is we've already acquired property outside of town that we are actually looking to do laundry services at, and then possibly take it out of our other 2 hotels, do a laundry building to free up space, because space in these hotels are very tough. There just isn't enough space when we have rooms that switch over. We've got furniture everywhere. I mean, it's a tough thing to do with the space we're allotted. The 4 or 5 rooms here on the first level just get us to the numbers that make it work financially, that we can keep moving with it. We offered, initially we had all rooms on the first level with a very small lobby. The lobby space has slowly been something that, people come in, check in, go to their room, go to the beach. They don't really gather or hang out in the lobby. We did feel this was an upper level hotel that we wanted some space to gather in the lobby, have a meal, still provide that hospitality that you expect at a hotel. We want something that is going to be a very nice product for the town, and it's something different than we have currently, but I don't know that we can eliminate the 4 rooms on the first level and still make it work. So.
All right, and just one final comment. There's another architect out in the audience there who's heard me rant on about this. I think you, Peyton, you've done a pretty good job of breaking up the facade. I just, as this thing develops, I just want to encourage you to do everything possible you can do, even beyond what you've already done, to break it up visually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, we like he's saying, with the zoning code the way it is, you get a box. So we gotta try to play with it and try to break it up as much as we can to bring that scale down. So
I appreciate that.
yes, sir.
Yes, if I may, I'd like to compliment Jim's remarks by adding my own views, which are in tandem with his and very much parallel what he said. First of all, the presentation has been great. I can see the thought that's been given to this project, and I really appreciate that. I, too, am worried about the streetscape. And I say this very gently. I'm not an architect, but if you pan to the big view of the building from the front, my honest reaction is
It's the other way.
it's a sterile design. And I, too, would encourage you to see if you can do more with the plantings and the first level. I was struck in looking at the renderings by all the signage, to tell you the truth, up high, on the end of the building, down on the ground. It seems to me that you have some opportunities perhaps to do more at that lower level to improve the aesthetics and the view from the street. And I think that would really complement this project. And I think it would be a draw in the sense that people that are thinking about staying at a hotel would look at it and be struck, with the attractiveness of the facility, and it would encourage your patronage. So I would like you very much to think about that, if you will, please.
Absolutely. Thank you.
If I may, sir, in terms of your underground parking, what types of approvals must you obtain? Are there FEMA, are there DENREC, are there Corps of Engineers approvals that you must get to have parking underground?
I'll have to look into that. I don't believe so, but
I'm just wondering, in a coastal community, how digging a hole and putting cars in it works with the ocean nearby.
yeah. Yeah.
What about plus review? Do they?
Yeah,
what-
yeah,
I can speak a little bit to that. We did check with the prior project, not with this one yet. You do have a certain number of lots from the ocean. There are different requirements. I think it's 3 lots. We are quite a bit of distance from that line that they draw and how many lots come back from it. With that, similarly, the Atlantic Sands has underground parking underneath. It's actually the floor of the Atlantic Sands is pretty much at the flood level. So surprisingly enough, we're right here on the beach and we're pretty much at flood level. So it's not as bad as it seems looking at it from the surface. Obviously, a major storm is going to impact everything, and hopefully, we can evacuate and get out with those levels. But it won't make a difference in terms of permitting. There's no actual additional permitting for that. We would just get confirmation that that is still acceptable and that we are outside the FEMA flood requirements. But we are
and you will have to go through a plus review, is that correct?
not with this project. I don't believe. I don't think we have to.
I can't remember now what the rules are in terms of the size of it, but I thought.
Thought it had to do with square footage.
It is square footage, and I don't have it off the top of my head. I know
Yeah. I thought lot square footage was also.
it may be 75,000 is what sticks in my head, but
Yeah,
I don't want to be
yeah, I
quoted.
Might want to flag that, please.
Yeah, definitely. This square footage is 40,000.
Yeah.
And I know I've done projects of 50 before without it. I don't know if 50 is a threshold, around 50, but I will take a look.
I thought lot size was too, but anyway.
We will have to do the site plan review, which is why we're here. That's a different trigger in your town than that, so.
I actually have a couple other questions about talking about the design and everything. I noticed I like the middle part, talking about breaking up the building that goes up with the name on it in the middle, but I don't know how that's covered in the code. I don't know whether Matt can speak to that, but, it's not a stair tower, it's not an elevator shaft, so it doesn't meet that exclusion. It does go to 48 feet, the same as the stair hall, and I just don't know how that's covered in the code.
Sure,
Or
we'll
whether
look.
that's something you would need a variance for.
Definitely a good pickup on that, and we'll take a look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the code does allow what they call an architectural embellishment,
Yeah.
which we're allowed up to 50 feet.
Right. Well, and the only problem with that is that it names them. And it names a dome, a spire, a cupola, a belfry, a chimney, or a pinnacle. Neither, none of which that is. But I mean, I liked it myself. I personally like it. I think it's very nice. I just don't know where it's covered, that's all. That's my only question. It's not something we have to answer today. I just, I like it, that's all I'm saying.
Mr. Strange?
Yeah, just one other comment.
Yes, sir.
For your own references, I think you are within 1,000 feet of mean high tide. So you may, in fact, require DENREC to sign off. It may be very simple, but they're going to have to sign off on it.
Okay.
Anyone else? I would point out, gentlemen, that we are awaiting a report from Wallace Montgomery, the city's planner, and so we may have to ask you to come back, depending on what that report says, and provide some additional information once we have the opportunity to receive it and review it. Just wanted to make you aware of that.
All right. Thank you.
Should we ask what next steps are, or do you have a next step?
I mean, our plan was to get your comments, which it seems like we've got a couple items here we need to look into and follow up on, or maybe it's just at a later point. Some of the design constraints that we may need answers to, and I don't know if at this point we work with the city staff or we get the report. I would say let's get the report from your consultant, see what they have to say, and maybe we have a follow-up meeting to address those concerns if there are any. And maybe after this meeting, we look at a few things and have our own questions back to you. Our goal is to work with you to get this thing through.
Very good.
We have to wait to enact our consultant to keep moving, but that would be the next plan, is to go to design drawings, start permitting, fire marshal, and submitting it to the town staff for review.
Okay, if we can, are there any members of the public here that wish to speak to this particular concept review application? Hearing none? Thank you very much.
Well done, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
The next matter on the agenda is continued discussion and possible vote on recommendations to the Board of Commissioners concerning possible amendments to Chapter 236 of the City Code regarding site plan review. This is a matter that's been before this body couple of times. And Mr. Mehta, I believe we need to discuss perhaps, we need to go over perhaps very briefly, but what we've already been over is these potential code revisions. And if you could pull up your, yes, there it is, and walk us through what we need to look at today, please.
Okay, so what is shown on the screen is a clean version 2 of what was going to be presented, or was prepared to be presented back in January, and I can, just so everybody's on the same page, this is not a red line, but I can tell you what the modifications are from the prior version. I think it'd be probably easier, in my view, you guys, it's your meeting, but in my view, I think working off version 2 would make more sense than working off of version 1 for purposes of today. The definitions, you know, we do not have a definition of development in this proposal. The definitions are just cleaned up here a little. We've taken out, I think, unnecessary language, you know, used or defined or as may be used. It's just cleaner to say as those terms are used. Same thing in substantial renovation, but otherwise those definitions really haven't changed. There's just some grammatical and language cleanup. There's no substantive change. So unless you have any questions, we'll move over to sort of the core section, which is 23630A. These would be projects requiring, in the affirmative, requiring site plan review. Again, we just explained how this differs from the version 1 of this draft. Again, just in the second sentence, it's just it's a language improvement. I think instead of saying subject to section 23633B, it says except as provided in section 23633B to make the relationship between the affirmative requirement of site plan review and the carve-outs more clear and more express. Again, just sticking with, and I'll just go through the changes, and we can go back and have a substantive discussion if you like. Under 23630A subsection 2, this draft adds the phrase at the end, or a substantial renovation of a building thereon. So that language here, or substantial renovation of a building thereon, is a substantive addition to the prior version, which I can show version 1 if you want, so you can compare and contrast. But you'll see that's different in version 2. Subsection 3, we just broke B and C. Instead of collapsing the phrases that are currently shown here as B and C into one B, we've separated them out to B and C. 4 isn't any different, although I understand somebody might be interested in talking about whether the phrase or construction really adds anything. That's not already covered by development. E19 and 20 is no different than version 1. 232, 36, 31D is no different than version 1. 236, 32F. It's the language that tracks the language that you approved back in January regarding your rules. That's no different than version 1. Okay, then we go to the carve-out. I refer to this as the carve-out, so if 23630A is the affirmative statement of when site plan review is required, 23633B would be the carve-out section. To be as clear as possible to all stakeholders what would not require site plan review. That's sort of the goal here. This provision, this version 2 differs from version 1 in that this version contains this language here in D as in dog to exempt a renovation should also require that the renovation does not require the demolition or reconstruction of more than 25% of the gross floor area. So that 2D clause in version 1 does not exist, in version 2 does not exist in version 1. Again, I can compare and contrast it for you. This language in version 2 also does not have language that was in version 1, which was an express attempt to carve out de minimis projects, de minimis exterior renovations and internal renovations. I can show you that language, again, when you get into the substantive review. I'm just trying to be clear how version 2 differs from version 1. This version 2 language does not, I can show it to you, it does not have the express language for the carve-out. The idea is that the carve-out is covered by this, that it's intended by de minimis exterior renovations and interior renovations is already covered by this language, and therefore would be superfluous. It's not to exempt it or to get rid of it. It's already covered, just a matter of drafting. And then finally, there's this where version 2 differs from version 1. Version 2 contains this last sentence, which is not in version 1. So the idea here is proposed 27084 within 5 days of receiving a building permit application for a commercial project involving new construction, remodeling, or in addition to an existing building for family zoned for commercial family use. The building inspector should cause to be posted on the city's website a copy of such building permit application and forward such building permit application to the city manager. And then this version contains this next sentence, which is not in version 1. No building permit shall be issued in connection with any such building permit application as to which the estimated valuation of work, including labor and materials, exceeds $50,000 prior to 45 days after such building permit application is posted on the website. The idea here is not to, capture within this 45-day period de minimis building permit applications, but rather to, again, with a objectively clear and transparent threshold, identify which building permit applications within this proposed language would be subject to this 45-day period. So that is how version 2, which is on the screen, differs from the prior iteration. I'm happy to show both of them if you like to compare them.
So really, it comes down to, in version 1, section 23633B2 has an extra sentence at the end about D. I'm sorry, has an extra sentence about exterior renovations that are only ornamental in nature or maintenance related.
No, so version 2 adds D, does not require the demolition or reconstruction of more than 25% of the gross floor area, but does not include, version 2 does not include the additional language for carve-outs for ornamental exterior renovations. That language is in version 1. You can make the argument that it's superfluous and unnecessary, but I can show you that language in version 1.
Okay. Again, it's 23633B2 and 270-84,
Yep.
where we have provisions that are not matching. They're not exactly the same.
Yeah, there's been an evolution based on ongoing discussions with some of you and with the city staff to try to come to a proposal that is where everybody may not agree, at least identifies and captures the issues that have been raised and strives to be as clear and objective and transparent as possible.
Now, again, these are only recommendations to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners has the legislative authority to adopt whatever it so chooses. This is simply a recommendation. Anybody here? Members of the commission, any thoughts?
I'd like to offer one suggestion for a technical change on 23630A. Number 4, I would propose that it just read the development of, comma, or substantial renovation of a building on, and then pick up with the rest of it.
So delete construction?
Yes, and the reason for that is development includes construction, so I think that is unnecessary. And I think it is helpful to keep the construction parallel to number 2, where you talk about development of an entirety or a portion of a parcel or a substantial renovation. In other words, the key operative terms become development and substantial renovation. There are no gaps between those words, and then the carve-out provisions later on in the statute complement all of that.
I'm trying to figure out the best way to proceed here. Would it be simply to take up, Earl, to take up your proposal and for us to make a decision one way or the other about that particular, and then we move to the next issue and the next issue? I think there may be a total of 3.
Propose, yeah.
I don't think you need to do this by, I don't think you need to do every change by motion. I think we can do the changes on the fly, and then there needs to be a motion at the end with regard to the language. So I think we can do, if there's a basic consensus, we can change that language.
Does anyone object to Earl's motion? Or not his motion, his proposal? Do we have a consensus? Ms.
I
Hunter?
don't have any objection, except that my understanding is the word development is not defined, right? And so that's probably why construction was added. Luke, is it your view that nothing would be lost by?
I don't think it adds anything, given the general understanding of the term development, which is now not specifically defined. I don't think construction adds anything.
Okay, so construction is clearly included within development.
I looked up the common meaning, and it does include any building on a property, so I think it's swept up.
All right, do we have a consensus on that issue?
All right, so I'm going to delete this live here, okay?
Okay. Then next is 23633B.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Susan, I'm sorry.
I had a comment about 23633B subsection 2D. I don't understand if that's under does not require if it's not more than 25% reconstruction or demolition, why that's not up in the affirmative section, a subparagraph requiring that those above that metric. I guess I don't like the convention of explaining what requires site plan review. And then at the other end, this sort of, I mean, I think you get into challenges with that. But, so I would propose to put that subsection D up under, phrase it, you know, the mirror image of that in 23630A, subsection 5, saying requiring, whatever the word is, requiring the demolition or reconstruction of more than 25% of the gross floor area. That make sense?
Any comments? Makes sense.
The rest of them stay then.
Yeah.
So we're moving 23633B B2D up to 23632F?
Wait,
No, I think
No.
it's 236-30A5.
Okay,
New
all right.
subsection or sub,
Where we just visited to take out the word
the
construction.
affirmative,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
So just so I'm clear,
Well, you do change the language because we're not saying, we're not defining what is exempted. We're taking a piece and we're saying what is, we're required, so, yes. So for more than 25% of gross floor area, it's up there as subparagraph 5 to that, whatever,
And at that,
236,
in that case, it would be required, a site plan review.
Exactly.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
With respect to that specific suggestion, is it, it's either redundant or it's ambiguous. I've already talked about a substantial renovation of a building without setting a percentage or without setting an amount. And it would seem to me that, you know, the substantial renovation definition that we have in the beginning of this proposal is a project that involves more than a 25% increase in the footprint, gross floor area, height, lot coverage. Aren't we getting somewhat redundant with the subsequent provisions of 236, either 30A or 33B?
Well, I was going to sort of go down that same path, I think, which is wondering if actually substantial renovation in the definition section should be revised based on Susan's comment. Now the renovation is 25% increase in X, Y, or Z. And what we're adding here is demolition or reconstruction of more than 25% of the gross floor area. So just to be clear, the language in 236-33B-D is intended to reach situations in which, although there is no necessarily or less than 25% increase in, say, the footprint or the height, it would still be covered because it is more, the demolition or reconstruction is more than 25%, all right? So I guess one thing I'm wondering is whether the demolition or reconstruction provision should be added to the definition of substantial renovation. If that were the case, it might make the language later on a little bit easier, but that's my question.
I think they just need to be tied together in some way where they're not repetitive or ambiguous.
Any thoughts as to what that might read like? Nan?
Isn't it just I agree that it would be great to take care of it in a definition section, but instead of just limiting it to square footage metric, it could be square footage or a percentage increase. Couldn't they both, you know, I don't know to the extent you're capturing different things there, but you could have something that increases over 25% of gross floor area that doesn't meet the 15,000 square feet. You know what I mean? Am I making sense? Perhaps not. So it would be good to have it in the definition of substantial renovation.
Well, I think the distinction you're making, Susan, if I understand it, is the difference between a 25% increase
Right.
in these metrics or a 25% renovation of 25% of the entirety without regard to whether it's increased or decreased. But let's put it on the table. The Atlantic Sands, as I understand it, the argument for not being required to go. I'm sorry, Sandcastle, excuse me, gentlemen. The argument in favor of them not having to have a building permit and go through site plan review was that there was no increase in floor area ratio and height and lot coverage and so forth, but yet they did substantially renovate the entire interior of that structure, as I understand it, and the exterior for that matter. So I think that's the distinction. Are we worried about an increase? Are we worried about, the project as a whole and what's covered? What's demolished or reconstructed?
I think that as it is worded, 23633B 2D clearly captures a situation in which there is demolition or reconstruction of more than 25% of the gross floor area. And substantial renovation, I mean, I initially started my comments on this by saying we should rewrite substantial renovation, but that's such a critical concept throughout this text. I'm just a little bit hesitant to do it on the fly. Maybe it can be done without a
I
problem.
am not interested, as I told some of you, I'm not interested in rewriting proposed statutory language on the fly.
Yeah.
So if this is where we're going to go, which is fine, then I think this comes up again next month. Okay, this is just a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. I will point out a couple of things, however, based on this discussion. If you want to capture this concept in the definition of substantial renovation, you have to look at where that term is actually used. So we're now defining substantial renovation. So if you're adding this concept into Chapter 236, substantial renovation, at least in the affirmative piece of 23630A, is only used in 23630A 2, 3, and 4. That's one point. The second point is, as I think I've said before, it is the goal here to be as clear to all stakeholders what is and is not going to be subject to site plan review. Ideally, of course, the affirmative 23633A language would mirror up and abut, just like those nice architectural drawings, right up to the carve-out. But it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to, I guess in theory, somewhere down the road, there could be a project that somehow falls in between the two, and we'll just have to deal with it at that point. We don't have to draft to perfection to anticipate every single possible scenario. And I think we're getting, if I may suggest, we will be here forever if we try to align the affirmative section and the carve-out section to abut like an architectural drawing. The idea here is to clearly state what affirmatively is required for does require site plan review and what clearly does not. So the developing public, the building official, everybody understands the rules of engagement.
Any other thoughts? Okay, so we do not have a consensus on that point at this moment, correct?
Well, can I make a suggestion for
Yes.
the definition of substantial renovation? What we have now in version 2, and version 1 for that matter, pretty much, is adding to the definition, if you wanted to marry up these two concepts into the definition of substantial renovation, you could say a project that involves more than a 25% increase in the footprint, gross floor area, height, or lot coverage of an existing building. That's the current language. Or construction or demolition of more than 25% of the gross floor area of an existing building, which gets you to what you were doing with 33B, as those terms are used in 270 of the code. That puts, because they are different concepts, but that would put both of them into the definition of substantial renovation, which would then subject both situations or scenarios to site plan review.
Any thoughts?
I like it.
Take them out of 33B?
Yeah.
I agree with Julie's observation. I think that gets us to where we need to be, and we can move on and make the recommendation to the commissioners now and take a vote on it.
Any other thoughts? Okay.
So is it coming out of 236-33B subsection 2D?
Yes.
So
what
going into substantial
Yeah,
renovation.
I think that's
that
terrific.
works.
Okay. All right, the term is terrific, so let's build on that. What's next?
Well, hold on a second. Do you want me to make this change here and move that concept into the definition of,
Yes,
Yes.
please,
you can vote on a clean version?
please.
Yes.
All right. You want to give me 1 second to do that, please?
Then I guess the last thing we have is the 50,000. I think you want Ann to come afterwards. Yeah. There you go.
Shouldn't it be and requires instead of,
Well,
I'm
this is-
trying to follow the negatives here.
Yes.
That involves more and requires the demolition. Or requires. Or requires, yeah.
Yeah, I said or.
How does that look?
I can't see it.
And then what happens in 23630A?
Yeah, I need to go back. Hold on, just give me 1 second, please.
Okay.
I know you're under a lot of pressure, Luke.
I think this works. Yeah.
Let me suggest, again, for clarity here, I'm going to suggest a project that involves, take it out. All right, so now the carve out in 23633B2 in version 2 resembles version 1. But now, just to be, and obviously if this is a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, they're going to have another look at this themselves. But now we are adding, modifying what you're suggesting is to modify the definition of substantial renovation. So it would now read a project that either A involves more than a 25% increase in the footprint, gross floor area, height, or lot coverage of an existing building, or B requires the demolition or reconstruction of more than 25% of the gross floor area, as those terms are used in Chapter 270 of the code. Again, by doing so, right, you then have to make sure that with that modification is only applying to those provisions of the proposed changes that use the term substantial renovation. So this modification would only apply to the development of or of the entirety or any portion of, just get rid of this space, a parcel of land in excess of 20,000 square feet or a substantial renovation of a building on a 20,000 square foot parcel. 3, a commercial project, either comprising of 15,000 square feet of gross floor area, B, involving a substantial renovation as now defined or redefined, or C, involving increased intensity usage, or now the 4, and this comes out of the CDP recommendation, of course, 4, the development of or substantial renovation of a building on an oceanfront parcel of land used for commercial purposes.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Does that work? And then I think we have one last issue, perhaps under, hold still, 270-84D2. Has to do with the last sentence, no building permit shall be issued in connection with any such building permit application as to which the estimated valuation of work, including labor and materials, exceeds $50,000 prior to 45 days after such building permit application is posted on the city website. Any thoughts on that? I think the $50,000 number was a bit of a compromise from a previous discussion, but I don't know that there's anything requiring that, certainly, and the question is, do you find that to be the right threshold?
I think it's worth reminding everybody that this is a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. By the time they get it and consider it, you know, they can put their own number in or a number that's suggested by the building inspector or people who are perhaps more knowledgeable or have more experience with these projects than we do. But it seemed to be a good number to go forward with it.
So basically, we're putting it as a placeholder at this time and giving the Board of Commissioners the opportunity to make such changes as they deem appropriate. Anybody object to that?
I have no objection. I would just emphasize that it applies only to commercial projects
That's correct.
or multifamily projects.
Is there anyone here from the public that wishes to comment on these revisions? Yes, sir. Please come forward and state your name.
Richard Perry, 46 Pennsylvania Avenue, here in Rehoboth Beach. I was very pleased to hear Ms. Davis raise the issue of the ambiguity as to what constitutes a substantial renovation, because I think you were going down a rabbit hole as it was originally constructed. And I know that everyone here is interested in eliminating the ambiguities that exist in our code, of which there are many. I do have a question about the last sentence that you were just discussing, and I apologize for not having followed your earlier discussions on this, but what is the purpose of establishing a dollar limit to delay issuance of a building permit? I mean, a renovation in a residential home, you can't even renovate your kitchen for $50,000. We're talking about commercial properties here, and you're going to hold up the issuance of a permit over a $50,000 amount? I just don't understand the rationale or what empirical evidence you have relied upon for establishing that. It just makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever.
All right, thank you, sir.
Mr. Perry, I'll try and respond to that because I initially raised this question. And I agree with you that it seems sort of superficially to be an odd requirement, but it comes out of months of unsuccessful attempts on our part to develop a rule for ensuring that building permits are available, applications for building permits are available to the public before they are issued. That is based on a history of situations in which a permit was issued for whatever set of reasons without the public being aware that the application for the permit was pending. And I suppose the most recent situation in that category was the Sandcastle Hotel. And probably all of us have had comments directed to us from members of the public concerning their displeasure with that degree of construction taking place in such a central location in the city. So I understand your point, and I'm happy to discuss it with you further after the meeting. But you could also go back and maybe look at some of the videos of our past meetings, and that would give you, I think, a context for where this is coming from.
Okay, well, I will certainly go back and review the videos from the prior meetings. I still think that it's a very unsupportable threshold to set in any event. The dollar limit just does not seem to me to be defensible. And it sticks out like a sore thumb, as you know, in my view anyways, and is not a benchmark that helps the public be aware that an application for a permit has been submitted. It is a limitation on someone getting a building permit that has already been posted simply because of a $50,000 renovation cost.
Okay, let me just respond to two things. One is, my understanding is that the application is received and posted and typically takes at least 30, 60 days before a permit would be issued. So the two things would run concurrently, not consecutively. And secondly, I would, and I may join you in urging the Board of Commissioners to utilize a different definition, which is where we started in this process. So this is where we are at the present time.
I would simply encourage you all to consider that we should be working to make things more flexible in the process and to not hamper the processing of applications, even though if they typically may take 30, 60 days currently, we should be trying to implement regulations and code provisions that will help facilitate those types of things being dealt with more expeditiously and not put roadblocks in the way to, simple renovations. I mean, inflation and everything, $50,000 is de minimis, and no one should, have to wait 45 days if they could have been improved in 30 days or 15 days.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Any other member of the public wish to address the Planning Commission about these statutory changes? All right, are we ready for a vote?
May I make a motion? It
Please.
would be my pleasure. All of this time that we've talked about this. I move that the Planning Commission recommend to the Board of Commissioners the revisions to Chapter 236, which is the City Site Plan Review Code, and to Chapter 270, which is the zoning code, that are shown on what has been called version 2 of the code change documents that Mr. Mehta has prepared and that have been revised during the course of this meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Resolution passes. Thank you.
Mike, did you do approval of minutes and verification of meeting notice?
Okay, I guess the last thing, please, on today's agenda, continued discussion and possible vote on recommendations to Board of Commissioners concerning amendments to commercial parking requirements of the City of Rehoboth Code, City of Rehoboth Beach Code.
Okay. Maybe I should, since there are people in the audience that haven't been here before, and since we also have some changes in front of us from Wallace Montgomery, I'm just going to give a very, very brief introduction as to how we got here and where we are. You know, and certainly as everyone up here knows, it was referred to us by the Board of Commissioners to review the entirety of Chapter 270-35, minimum parking spaces required in the zoning code, and to provide them with recommendations, which we are in the process and finalizing. We hope to finalize some of them today, perhaps. Then the Planning Commission chose to divide that task into two parts, commercial and residential. And we addressed commercial first. The changes that we came up with are actually fairly minimal. There was one change, and that was in hotel parking requirement, and two clarifications were needed in the current code, and we came up with those last month, and we're prepared to move forward on voting on those today. But in the interim, Wallace Montgomery has found other language and code provisions that we need to address in the commercial code. So rather than attacking commercial piecemeal, we need to look at their entire list of recommendations today. And using that list as a guide, then we'll go over them. And if we can get comfortable with moving the recommendations forward today, we can. If they need additional discussion, then that's okay too. I don't have a preference. I feel like I'm just a facilitator here, but happy to move on with the discussion and using their document with their initial recommendations as a guide.
Thank you. Who do we have here from Wallace Montgomery, please?
Both.
Good afternoon. My name is Nick Walls.
I'm Lauren Good.
And your office prepared the initial recommendations and conclusions?
Correct.
Do you mind reviewing those with us, please?
Sure.
Do we want to do them one by one? Like they'll present one, they'll discuss one? Okay, that's fine.
Right. The initial recommendations, the first one was to increase the minimum parking requirement ratio for hotels from 1 parking spot for every guest room to 1.2 spaces for every guest room. The way that the current code is written, we felt that one would assume that there is one vehicle that is being used for guests, so that would account for that, which we know is not always the case. And then also that parking ratio does not account for any staff of the hotel. So we were looking at a number that would try to make this requirement a little bit more realistic for the people that would be using the hotel services.
And does the fact that there isn't really a lot of surface parking available in the city of Rehoboth enter into that analysis?
It certainly does, because the on-street parking, especially as you get closer to the boardwalk and the beach areas, that is also tied to the payment system, and that there is that lack of surface parking or land available to provide additional surface parking. That is definitely something that we took into consideration. And as you can see in the initial part of this memo, we looked at various sources to see how this is being handled in other communities, both within Delaware as well as what we would coin resort communities along the East Coast, whether those were summer coastal communities or winter ski type resort communities, because they have to deal with similar situations. So we looked at those. We also looked at some of the American Planning Association's parking standards or guidelines, as well as the Institute of Traffic Engineers, their parking generation manual. And when we kind of looked at the end result of that analysis, we thought that 1.2 parking space ratio would make sense.
Okay. Now, again, Planning Commission, just remind you, these are recommendations to the Board of Commissioners, just like what we just previously went through. So they will make the final decision about what we're doing, but we were asked to look at this and to make recommendations, and so that's, we're complying with the request from the Board of Commissioners. Any thoughts about 1.2 to 1 for rooms, Mr. Strange?
Well, I want to thank Wallace Montgomery for the research that they did, and I appreciate that. And case studies are very good. The research was excellent. But I am highly conflicted with the recommendation. And the reason being, it's a backward-looking recommendation, or a now recommendation. It's not a recommendation that reflects where the city will be and where it's going. And if you design a system, we are a system collectively, of the components that go into the urban design. If you design it for cars, you get more cars. And people in cars don't spend money. Tourists spend money when they're out of their car and when they're walking on the streets of Rehoboth Beach. And so it creates a really difficult situation. On the one hand, you have a requirement for the physicality, but if you upgrade the 1.2, for example, with regard to hotels, for future hotels, within our existing FAR ratios, you're guaranteeing yourself that hotels will automatically seek a Board of Adjustment variance, because the dynamics of what the hotel is constructed, how it's constructed, is now going to be different. The problem with that is the Board of Adjustment only makes their decisions based on 3 criteria. We make our decisions based on 28. So there's a direct conflict there that is not easily resolved. When I look at this, and I take a totally different tact, is I look at it from a long-term policy analysis perspective, is we know what's happened in the past, and the case studies are excellent, the IT, all the manuals that are referred to are excellent, but they deal with the now. But once you leave the physical geometry of a parking space, you're now into uncharted territory, because now it becomes a function of what is the nature of your town. And you can look at different towns, just as Wallace Montgomery did. And towns outside of our jurisdiction have very different approaches to this. And if you look at our CDP, it comes into conflict in the basic structure of what we want the city to be if you proceed to implement greater parking requirements in the commercial area. So there's direct conflicts there that create perhaps an unsolvable situation. And since I only got this last night, I didn't have the time to do the rest of the analysis that I would do for long-term policy analysis. There are jurisdictions that create their environment where it's much more walkable, and in fact, you don't have access to a vehicle. You have to park remotely and get alternative access into the core of the city if you want to maintain the core of the city or the attributes that the city has. We happen to have an ocean, which is very beneficial. And our population goes up by a significant amount for several months of the year. So I can't vote in favor of 1.2, and it's not a question whether it's 1.1 or 1.3. It's a question of what's the overall philosophy of what parking should be within the totality of the city. And therefore, for example, if it was 1.2 or 1.3 or 1.1, that has a series of chains of causality, a whole series of downstream events that'll take place. And one of the immediate one that came to mind when I read this was, and I think I said it previously, is hotels immediately are going to start requesting variations to the FAR. And they're going to request changes in the height requirement because they can't sufficiently generate the funds for the availability of the parking they're going to have to put in when you look at the long-term return on your investment. So it may, in fact, set in motion a dramatic change to what is the very core viability of what our city really is. So where I'm at right now is, in fact, I'm going to have to abstain from voting on this because I can't come to a moral certainty as to what the future will hold if we were to make a change like that in the commercial area. So I'm very disturbed by it because I think much more long-term policy analysis has to be done, which involves a lot of the integration of things, not just, oh, we need to fit more cars, therefore. What's going to be the sequela that happens because of that decision? And I am deeply troubled by it. It doesn't necessarily mean that 1.0 is good either. You know, it may have got us into a lot of problems already with certain things, but I don't think we should, even though I appreciate the research, and the research is excellent, but it only goes so far. And what's missing is the forward-looking perspective in the context of our CDP. That's my 2 cents worth.
Anyone else?
Do we want to go through them all rather than voting on anything individually? Because there are some that are related to each other. Yeah. Okay. You want to go to the second one?
Yes,
Right,
please.
Okay. And this is also related to hotels. Lauren? You wanna do this one?
Yes. This one is to identify the accessory uses present in modern hotels that result in increased parking demand but are currently not required to have parking spaces proposed as part of the hotel's development. So things like the conference rooms, gathering areas, or meeting rooms of a certain size, banquet halls, dance floors, similar communal spaces, or other accessory uses that I'm sure we can all think of that many of the modern hotels have today. And then, yes. Actually, if you want to.
For purposes of calculating the minimum number of parking spaces, these accessory uses should perhaps be classified as meeting and event space and assigned a parking ratio requirement of 1 space for every 250 square feet.
And you came up with the 250 based on your research, right?
Correct. That was the ballpark, the average of a mix of office and event-type
Right. Yeah.
uses. And I'm sorry, not just within Rehoboth's code, but
Right, oh yeah, no,
within
everywhere.
the larger areas.
Right, right.
Could
And
I-
that's one of the things we talked about last week, is that we would zero in on meeting and event space, but not retail space or restaurant space, right?
Question just for a point of clarification. The way this is structured, it says 1 space for every 250 square feet. I'm wondering if someone has 240, okay? Would your intent really for 250 and less in each increment of 250, or you only trip it if you're above 250? I know it's small, but it seems to me it's a key issue.
I'm not sure there'd be anything less than 250.
Yeah.
The way I think our code is currently done, we do round up. So if someone, for instance, has, if there's a part of the code that has like 1 space for 400 square feet or something, and if the space is 410 square feet, then they need 2 spaces. So it typically is rounded up, if that's what you mean.
That is my question.
Yeah.
So if it was 200, it would be treated as though it was 250.
Right.
That's
I think
my
that's right.
question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Excuse me, but isn't this really about employees?
No.
That's
For office spaces? Is this, does that mean office spaces for? Oh, I see.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
in number 2. I mean, I think what we talked about last time is the fact that if there is conference and event space, then people are coming for that might not be staying in the hotel, but they're coming into town, they're bringing a car into town. So, you know, and typically, I mean, this is actually one area of our code where nearly every other town requires parking for this use, right? I mean, we're a little unusual in that regard, in that we have not required it up to this point. We do require it for office within the hotel, but not for the meeting rooms.
Okay, next.
Number 3, increase the minimum number of parking spaces required for office space uses from 1 parking space per 400 square feet to 1 space for every 200 square feet of office area.
Right.
And this is basically to bring the ratio more closer to the average of all of the municipalities and jurisdictions that we studied. Basically, the average was closer to 250. we're up at 400 right now. Feel it makes sense to bump that up a little bit, if that.
Any comments on that? All right, number 4.
This is one of the new ones that we have not talked about before, this next one coming up. So there may be some explanation necessary here and some history.
So for this one, it references section 270-35C, which currently reads, for structures not used for dwelling in a commercial district, up to 50% of the required parking space may be provided on a separate lot or in a separate facility in the same ownership whose principal point of pedestrian access is not more than 700 feet from the principal entrance of the building and which is located in a commercial district. So coming from this, reading it for the first time as a planner,
So basically, the code identifies hotels as dwellings, and appeals to the Board of Adjustments have upheld this interpretation. But there's also been variances granted for those provisions. And so really, we want to clarify, clarification on the intended application of the section may be something to consider. Essentially, are we being clear in this section? Is it evident where it should be applicable to? And then the second point here is that the second part of the section discusses the principal point of pedestrian access being not more than 700 feet from the principal entrance. Basically, the question is how are you actually making that measurement? Is it point-to-point distance from door to door, direct straight as the crow flies? Or is the length calculated by following existing pedestrian infrastructure and adhering to common pedestrian safety practices like crossing at a crosswalk instead of mid-street, things along that line? So it's a seemingly simple question, but it will have direct implications for some of the recent proposals that we've seen that were right at the 700-foot borderline. So.
And I think the way they calculate it is the pedestrian infrastructure. That's what I think they do.
I would recommend that.
Yeah, right. And I wish Matt were here because he could answer that, but I believe that's what they've done before. And the only reason, and this is not a change, this is existing in code now, so this is not a change, but this is an area where I guess you all are recommending, Wallace Montgomery is recommending that we clarify the beginning statement there for structures, and unfortunately it's worded in the negative, for structures not used for dwelling, this off-site parking is allowed. For structures used as dwelling, whether they're residential or hotel, it's not allowed per code, but the history is there have been a bunch of variances granted. I just mentioned some today with the Sands. And the Avenue Inn has 10 parking spaces across the street, and they actually came to the Board of Adjustment a number of years ago for that, and they first appealed this language, and the language in the code was upheld that yes, a hotel is a dwelling, but they got the variance. So it's just a matter of clarifying that that it applies to all dwellings. And I don't know how to wordsmith that to make it to me it's clear as is, because if you look at the definition of dwelling in our code, it clearly says it's a building used for living or sleeping by human occupants. But our consultants believe that we need to make certain of that, as well as the distance issue.
Any thoughts? Yes, sir, Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, in this case, I agree with your statement with regard to, I think we need to make a formal statement from the portal of the applicant to where the primary entrance is for the parking using public pathways, not through private property, but portal to portal through those entrances, which is missing right now. And I think that should be clarified explicitly. To your point, you can't just run across the street. You've got to, or go down the boardwalk. You have to go through normal pedestrian approved access, public access. And I think that should be modified for that.
Okay. Number 5.
Okay. Go ahead. This is another clarification. This is another, not a change, but just something they spotted was missing from our chart.
Correct. So currently, in section 270-35D7, that concerns the number of parking spaces for retail stores or service shops that are over 15,000 square feet. Other than a subsequent provision that discusses retail or service shops that front only on the boardwalk, there's no discussion of retail stores or service shops that are under 15,000 square feet. So we see this as there being a possibility of multiple interpretations where, because it's not, there is no provision expressed, that could mean that there are no spaces required, or because there is no specific provision, the section of the code that applies to all other commercial uses could be considered, and in that case, there would, I believe it's one space per 200 square feet at that point. So this was just requesting a clarification on what the intent was, whether those retail spaces that are under 15,000 square feet, if it is the intent to not require parking spaces, to just explicitly say as such.
And that's a very good catch, because as you point out, we're trying to get this up, the current code chart up on screen.
And can you turn the air media thing back on, please?
Because we obviously don't require parking for lower, square footages. In the case of restaurants, it's less than 10,000 square feet, and that's spelled out in the code as no spaces required. But Lauren's right that when it comes to retail stores, it addresses over, but it doesn't address under. And in order to make it clear, we would just say under 15,000 square feet, no spaces required.
Correct. And I think that further confuses this issue because in those two other instances where uses under a certain square footage do explicitly state no spaces required, that also leads to the ambiguity of this as it's currently written.
Right.
What's your recommendation on this?
If it is, and I believe it is, the intent that those retail spaces under 15,000 square feet are not to provide additional spaces, then I think just stating similar to, let's see.
6.
Similar to 6, that first subclause, that less than 15,000 square feet of retail stores or service shops,
no spaces.
No spaces required.
No spaces required, yeah.
So these last three changes are just making express what has been the understanding and the intent all along.
Correct.
Yes.
A lot of words to say that.
And I thank you for pointing that out, because we had not caught that.
So really, we're looking at the initial recommendations and conclusions, numbers 1, 2, and 3. The others are clarifications, not substantive revisions.
Right.
And that was one parking spot for every guest room to from 1 to 1 to 1.2. One space for every 250 square feet of meeting and event space. And the number of spaces required for office space from one parking space per 400 square feet to one space for every 250 square feet of office area. Is that a fair summary?
That is an excellent summary. Yes.
I have
Ms.
a
Stewart.
quick question. And I know we discussed this a little bit, but I don't know. So a restaurant that's in like the Atlanta Crowne, does that get pulled into this banquet hall, dance floor, communal space, or not? And is there a difference between a restaurant that's got a separate lease in a building versus one that the hotel owns and is in their space, so it has a bar and seating and serves some kind of food? How does that work?
Well, I think Atlantic Crown had talked about perhaps entering into some type of a lease arrangement with Eden and other restaurants who would come in and run the actual restaurant operation.
And then therefore, that space would not have any requirement for parking?
I think that's what we talked about last time.
Because it wouldn't if it were standalone? Is
Correct,
that what you?
exactly, that's what we're there.
All right.
Yes, that's where we came out.
Yes, sir.
I think I asked either at the meeting, or maybe I communicated that separately to you, Susan, that I think that the in-hotel eateries, of whatever scale they are, do need to be considered. They may choose to lease out the running of it, but it basically, in the case of the Crowne, is still basically part of the hotel operation. And I think the others that we're looking at all have a similar situation where they have, in-house eateries essentially there for the purpose of serving hotel guests. And I think that's a separate
The
situation.
hotel guests are already taken care of from a parking perspective by their room parking
But
requirement.
not the staff.
Well, that's
If you
true,
have an
but-
eatery, you've clearly got to have 3, 4, 5, no matter how small the operation. And I think that perhaps the easiest way to handle this is to say meeting and event space and including in-house, food service mainly intended for hotel guests. But I think that there's you could classify that as a square footage issue relatively easily. But yes, it is mainly about the staffing.
Well, how do we want to do this?
How do we want to proceed from this point?
Yeah, Earl has a question.
Earl?
I'm impressed with my colleagues' ability to spot issues here. I wanted to make a couple general comments and see if I could get a reaction. Mike, your opening statement about, your concern about raising the space number, I see that and I understand that. I want to tell you a little bit about, what my reaction was. I looked at all the data, and I thought the increase was a modest one. Now, what strikes me here is you're absolutely right. I would like to envision, a more walkable city, and I think that's where we should be going. But I think the reality these days is one space per room, I'm going to start with that, is almost unrealistic in that it kind of envisions that every room in that building will be serviced by one visitor vehicle. And while I do think that probably will be ordinarily the case, I don't think it would be always the case. And I think that an increase, whether it's 1.2 or 1.1, is almost required when you think, just kind of intuitively about the fact that people that are staying in a hotel these days are going to be driving there, So, whether you say you've got one room and you've got a family that has 2 cars, maybe not in every room, but you've got to think about they're going to have guests in there. I don't know what the exact number is, but my gut tells me 1 is too low. Notwithstanding what you said, which I agree with. And I wish we could design a world that would get us to a brighter future immediately, but I don't know how we do that. We're wrestling with dealing with change that is already on us. And what we're trying to do is react to, the change that has already occurred and not overreact so we preclude getting to a better place that we all think we should get to down the road. So I sort of throw that out. I also think a little bit about when we talk about, retail space and things like that. I'm a little nervous about doing something like that because of it seems to run counter, and we talked about this before, with what we do in other settings where we don't require spaces for that. And I don't think we should have a dampening effect on commerce in this town. What we're dealing with is trying to make reasonable, intelligent changes where we have to make them and not overreacting. So I am a little worried about moving to the restaurant area. I don't think we can make distinctions between the legal arrangements of the hotel and the restaurant in it, based in, distinctions based on that. I worry about, attacks on commerce. One thing we could consider is, the common meeting areas in the hotel space stuff I see, and that seemed to be reasonable to me. If the concern is really employees, and the workforce, isn't that the target to shoot at rather than commerce or something like that? And I'm not saying you should presume everyone that works there has a car, but that seems to be a more neutral, objective way to
And
contemplate.
many codes do exactly that.
Correct. And unfortunately, we did explore that concept. Personally, I was a little dissuaded from that approach because of the difficulty in administering it. With restaurant workers, you've got a lot of turnover in staffing. You've got a lot of transition. You've got in a seasonal town as well, you'll have a high and a low for the counts of employees. It will create an administrative burden somewhere along the chain to have to keep track of what those numbers are, or to require the applicant to supply them at the very onset, when they, probably in likelihood, they'll be ballpark, but not fully accurate. And then so you get into issue of, well, you said at application you're going to have 50 employees, but now you've got 80. How do you address that discrepancy at that point? So I think that at least I felt a little bit more comfortable with the, I'll call it non-changing entities, the physical spaces.
Yeah, right.
Hope that makes sense.
Anyone else?
I just would like
Davis.
to reiterate, I think I said this the last time, at our last meeting. I am firmly of the view that retail space and restaurant space, absent other compelling reasons, within a hotel shouldn't be treated any differently for parking purposes than retail space and restaurant space that are outside the hotel in freestanding buildings. That's first off. But my second issue has to do with the meeting room, conference room. I've been here for long enough, and you belong to some organizations, and you've been in and out of the hotels that are here. There are at least 3 on the boardwalk that have substantial space for meeting rooms, venues, wedding receptions, rehearsal dinners, convention centers, and so forth. Those meeting rooms are generating traffic cars that have nothing to do, in some cases, yes, some of their attendees may be staying in the hotel, but for the most part, those folks, they have people coming in from out of town who are not who are probably not staying in the hotel, but yet are taking up parking places in our downtown area that are then preventing some of our shoppers and other restaurant owners from being able to find a place to park in the vicinity. And I think that's one of the things that we ought to look more carefully at, because I do think if this is about not just cars, but maintaining a level of availability of parking for all visitors to the city, and even some residents who, for whatever reason, can't walk from wherever they are in North Rehoboth or South Rehoboth into the city, and so will drive. I think that's one of the things that we ought to think about, and maybe it's societal, but it's a consideration that I think we should keep in mind, that it's more of a policy issue than a numbers issue.
And to sort of build on that, and with Commissioner Strange, what you were saying as well, and what others have echoed, I absolutely agree with your concept and philosophy that a adjustment in parking ratios has much greater implications than simply the number of parking spots. You're right. But I think that addressing that topic requires a much larger lens than what we're currently focusing on right here. There needs to be a comprehensive approach looking at not just the hotel parking requirements, but also your other commercial areas, your residentials, all the other pieces, and then tying in the transportation elements, the public transportation elements primarily. You know, we have a rise right now in micromobility options too. What type of impact do those scooters and Ubers and all that fun stuff, what all impact does that have on your parking demand? I would still suggest something that the city consider a more broader parking analysis for the long term, and tie that in to the CDP's focus on sustainability, walkability, accessibility. Tie it together so that there is that path from addressing the immediate needs to getting the city to where we want to be 10, 20, 30 years down the road. We've got to start somewhere to get that change to start going. This isn't the best vehicle for that, but we can at least try and solve some of the more pressing immediate demands.
Well, I just want to make one more comment, just to be clear as to where my intent was. I don't think that it is unreasonable to expect a hotel that maintains a large area that is going to be rented and will have economic value for outside events to be scheduled there, and to have that area provided for people who are coming into the city in cars. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect some additional parking to be provided in connection with those venues, which is what I call them, whether it's for a conference, a meeting, a wedding reception, whatever, because they do have economic value, because for the most part, because I've scheduled some things in some of these hotels, you get to pay a fairly substantial fee to be able to use those areas. And so, and it's not, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect some parking to be provided.
All right. Mr.
I take one
Strange.
last shot. No, there was I won't use the pejorative, but there was a famous management consultant years ago that phrase was, you don't want to urinate in your own soup. And I think, in fact, with this change, and I agree with Wallace Montgomery overall, but I think what's being missed here, and yet I agree with the comments of my associates, it's not unreasonable when you look specifically, only explicitly on the parking issue, but it's the implications of when you go from 1 to 1.2 or 1.1 or 1.3 or whatever what you want, is what are the follow-on things that occur that will occur almost immediately. And our value as a city, as we talk about in the CDP, is the small town charm. Now that charm is under stress right now. And I would, just to put it in perspective for those that were here 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and 40 years ago in my case, workforce housing, there were several establishments, one, I won't use the names, but one in particular, where all the staff stayed above their establishment in a dormitory. You can't do that now. And there's another one that housed them in a home on the boardwalk. Can't do that now. And so times have changed. 40 years ago, everyone did, in fact, come by car. The bus service was very minimal. Now when you look at how people are coming into the city, 40 years ago, there were no bike racks down the boardwalk. Now they're all over the place. There was no parking spaces for motor scooters. Now there's parking spaces for motor scooters. So there's been an evolution for things that we didn't think about. Now in this particular case, the only thing I'm putting forward is we have a parking problem. No question about that. It gets worse at some times of the year versus others. But in increasing to 1.2, my concern is the chains of causality that occur of what happens when you go to 1.2. I agree with what everyone said with regard to current circumstances. But when you go to 1.2, that means new applications for new hotels are going to be coming in and saying, well, because of the expense associated with it, even though we get underground parking for, quote, free, and it doesn't count towards the FAR, in order to justify the investment, we have to go taller, wider, larger coverage. So you're playing a difficult game here in trying to maintain what is the actual drawing card of what is Rehoboth Beach. And I go back to what I said earlier is if you start building everything to accommodate, quote, the automobile, you destroy the very things that people are coming here for. And I agree, it's an incredibly difficult balance. But we're seeing a transition already with regard to the number of bicycles that are coming into town, the number of motor scooters that are coming into town, the amount of public conveyance that's being utilized, both on DelDOT systems and private systems, because people realize there's a problem with parking in town. And I don't think what will happen is, what I'm saying here, and granted, it's my forecasting based on my previous experience as an engineer, what's going to happen is those establishments, in particular hotels, are going to be coming in and you're going to see far more requests to the Board of Adjustment to give them relief with regard to how high they need to go, how wide they need to go, how deep they need to go, because to do otherwise is a hardship they can't deal with. And that is my main concern. We have several hotels that are already in process. And I think going from 1 to 1.2 on the surface may appear to help us, but I think in just a few years, it'll become a detriment, and the very thing we wish to preserve, we're going to destroy. So it is problematic, and and as I said, the research that was done by Wallace Montgomery is excellent. Excellent with regard to what has been and what is. It doesn't address at all what's going to be, taking into account those other things that are part of our urban system, which is us. And the last thing I would want to see is for us to lose what is the drawing card, what is Rehoboth Beach. And that's such a delicate, delicate balance. You go too far to one side or the other, and you can lose it forever. And all the literature indicates that. When you lose sense of place, and it can go on for hundreds, well, there's a lot of data in some cities, they lost it 100 years ago. Others have lost it in the last 20, 30, 40 years. There's numerous examples. And this is a tough one. This is a tough one. And it seems simple, but the causality is worse than that, in my opinion. With that, I'll be quiet. Thank you.
If I could just add a little bit to that. I'm very sympathetic to everything that Michael just outlined, and many of your comments are reasons why I feel very conflicted about where we are with this and how difficult and careful a balance we're all trying to strike. I'll limit my comment to where the future of transportation seems to be going, at least for the foreseeable future around here. The hotels that are being built, as well as the hotels that we currently have, a lot of people can't necessarily pay that freight for a single occupancy. And more of these rooms are being occupied by 2s and 3s and 4s, often bringing 2s and 3s and 4s vehicles along with them. Delaware is horrible with any form of public transportation, always has been, and frankly, during our lifetimes, always will be. So just a kind of a caveat as we're thinking this through, just because, it's, a 50-room hotel, because they're charging $750 a night in season, they're probably going to be more than one vehicle per room in those locations.
Anyone else?
Mike, can I ask you one question? I'm trying to think hard about what you said. And I'm also thinking that, we're going to make a recommendation. We're not going to decide the issue today. So, the question here is, do we move at all? Or do we stay where we are on a number of these issues? So as I think about it and look at the questions here through that lens, would you say in your mind the number one space per room right now is where it should be? Because I'm listening to you, you're raising good points, but I keep coming back to this idea that parking is tight now, and Julie talked about the fact that, there is value in these developments, and they factor that into what's proposed, and of course you're saying they'll come to us for adjustments, but I guess at the end of the rainbow, I keep thinking the number one does not seem like it fits with the challenges the city faces today, or some of the realities of use that you just alluded to, Mike, and that I see myself. So, I mean, it's your problem with 1.2, as opposed to 1, or is it, do you think 1 is the right number? I'm trying to bore in on that because I can't warm up to 1, but I'm trying to smoke you out on what you're.
Well, I'll let since I've been talking so much, Susan had a comment.
I guess that parking is a zero-sum game here, because I think all the parking that's going to be here in terms of the available spaces that are already developed. So I'm concerned about, I do agree with Earl that the idea that a hotel room is simply overall, on average, going to have one space is, and that doesn't even account for, I just don't think it's realistic. So if you accept it's a zero-sum game and you have a hotel that comes in that will consume more space than their needs, then we're crowding out other spaces for others. And I'm concerned about that. And I'm not so hotel-centric that that's necessarily adds to the sense of place. I know we want to, we want to encourage commerce here, but I think that's a poor reason not to at least have them bear their own weight of the parking needs they're creating. And so 1, to me, and I think that's what Earl's saying, I mean, 1 doesn't cover it. Now, what does cover it is a trickier question, but 1 isn't sufficient.
It is a conundrum
Yeah.
to answer, to respond to Earl.
Well, if I may make a suggestion, we have a report that it's very recent to all of you. I think, Mike, you made a note of how recent it was, and I think that this has been a great discussion. And I think everybody is thinking now and maybe ready to make a decision today, but my preference would be that we put this on the agenda for number 1 in March. Everybody further consider what they think their position ought to be, although I think there's somewhat of a unanimity here. Mike, you may be you may be out there lonely, but having said that, I would suggest that we defer this until the March meeting.
Mike, can I just, I would like to know from this mic, I'm very uncomfortable with 1.0 and 1.2 because of what Mike is saying, and I would like to know, how would we go about informing ourselves more of the issues that we might be generating, that you discuss? Is that something that can be done fairly quickly? If so, I would frankly put this off, but I would like to know more about Mike's concern. And how do we go about doing that?
Can I just say, I strongly agree with that. And I'm wondering, are there any metrics? I mean, I understand one of the great difficulties here is that it's a moving target. We've got a tiny amount of physical space. The number of parking spaces is inadequate. We don't want to incentivize hotels to send their customers or residents onto on-street parking, which everybody complains about already endlessly, right? But we also don't want to build in a cycle that just reinforces more and more sort of automotive issues. I'm not an engineer, but I'm very curious about whether there are metrics from somewhere that could give us a better, more quantifiable sense of this moving target. And whatever there is, there is. And if there are mechanisms for, I don't know, sunsetting or something, where we just accept that we'll make the best decision we can now, given what the facts are now and the parking problems are now. And maybe in 5 years, the advent of, electric bikes and other kinds of devices will make a difference, although I'm skeptical about how much of a difference that would make for people coming to a hotel or bringing beach chairs or whatever. But it feels to me like we're just not well enough informed, given, I take Mike's questions very seriously.
Wallace Montgomery, is this a resource you can provide?
What I'm hearing is a request for a very detailed parking study. And frankly, I would not want to have Wallace do that because there are well-regarded experts in the realm of parking specifically. It gets into a lot of varied elements. Yes, we do parking demand analysis at a very high level, but the scale and breadth of what you guys are requesting goes beyond what I would feel comfortable doing internally. And so I do have recommendations for parking specific design and engineering firms. I will warn you though, from what I'm hearing, it's neither going to be cheap nor quick.
Right, and I think the city is already looking at doing a comprehensive, traffic and parking analysis. And my understanding was that there was some data that they were supposed to have by the end of the year just on the number of spaces. But my response to that would be that I don't think this is solely a parking problem. I think this is an urban planning problem, and there's nobody better to address urban planning than Mike Strange, and he has just done that from a 1,000-foot level. I wish we could be that walkable town that we would love to still be. But I also agree with others that this is Delaware. And we seem to be a very car-centric place. And any attempts, just in the, 10 years or so I've been here, there have been attempts to take like the first block of Rehoboth Avenue and turn it into a pedestrian zone, and people went nuts. What do you mean we can't drive all the way up to the bend? So it would require a rethinking of our entire urban plan, which would be a great thing to happen someday. I'm not saying it wouldn't. I would love to live in that kind of place. I don't know how, A, it's not a reality today, and B, I don't know if it ever will be. So I would like to deal with the current day as well as the future.
If I may, I don't vote, right? I think I say this every meeting, but it's important to I just want to pick up on the chair's suggestion. My recommendation would be that a couple of things. First of all, that this body consider actual proposed language that it drafts and considers. Second, I would suggest that this body read what it recently received, but make the analysis its analysis. This body should articulate what the issue is and what the solution is, rather than just adopting, with all due respect, what it may have received. And then finally, I do think this short-term versus long-term issue is a distinction that you want to carefully consider. You don't need to build Rome in a day. Maybe you consider certain short-term modifications today, and maybe some of the longer-term strategic issues, such as the one Mike is raising, require some additional analysis. But it may be that some changes don't require a whole lot more study, and some changes do. Just a suggestion.
Mr. Chair? Earl had asked a question and I was going to try to respond to that. We have a parking problem now. We're going to have a parking problem in the future, no matter what you select. The reason being the very nature of what Rehoboth Beach is. And when you have 150,000 people showing up for the 4th of July, and you have 50 to 75,000 showing up for Sea Witch ad infinitum, you will never have enough parking, period. And special accommodations are made during that period to accommodate that. What I'm saying is, I think that those type of special accommodations, and John made a good point, and I should say this, the comments about Delaware are absolutely true. I had the privilege of being the director of planning at DelDOT for 5 years before I retired. And this type of thing wasn't really part of what they were capable of doing. And with all due respect to everyone, we really don't need a parking study per se. We know we have insufficient parking, period. And I can put that in a formalized letter if you would like. And we're never going to have enough parking. But it's in that transition, to Earl's point, is 1 correct? Is 1.2 better? Is 0.8 better or worse? 1 was really arrived at from historical perspective. And the historical perspective with regard to 2, I think it was 12 years ago, when I had just, maybe it was 13, when I had just joined the Planning Commission, there was a discussion to increase the number of parking spaces required for residential. And the real estate agents and the developers went ballistic. Now that has other implications that go beyond parking. You could say, well, you need 3 or 4, depending on the number of bedrooms, you need X, and there is a lot of science behind that. Based on X amount of bedrooms, Y amount of cars. But in Rehoboth Beach, because most of the lots are 50 by 100 feet, if you specify more parking spaces on a lot, unless you're going to allow people to park in the grass, it has all sorts of implications with regard to environmental issues, setback issues, and one thing leads into another. To Earl's comment about what is the right number. We don't know what the right number is. The only thing we do know is that certain numbers can be worse because of what happens if you select that number. We have one, and we've had a variety of things occur over the last many years with regard to existing infrastructure, hotels in particular, and having a need to go to the Board of Adjustment for relief. What I'm saying is, based on currently what we know, if you go from 1 to 1.2, 1.3, or 1.1, immediately you're going to start seeing, in my opinion, based on what's occurred in the past, based on the evidence, immediate requests for relief to the Board of Adjustment in order to go higher in order to meet that requirement. And that's what really bothers me. And the reason it bothers me, and I'll go to the CDP, and it's the two key paragraphs here. Maintaining a balance will require a commitment that future development and redevelopment, both residential and commercial, reflect and be compatible with the city's existing neighborhoods as well as its commercial districts, particularly regarding building height, architectural character, pedestrian orientation. And then we go and talk about the vision of the city, and it says that Rehoboth has unique character, history, and small-town charm and architectural design, pedestrian-oriented scale, sense of place, and expanding from its origins, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have a conflict here which is not easily solvable. What I'm saying is we're attempting to solve it with one characteristic in parking that's going to have unintended consequences that we're not going to like. What we have now is bad. We have too many people and not enough places to park. But we've demonstrated that when we have large groups of people coming in for special events, there are means for people to park remotely. And we haven't pursued those sufficiently. It's done all the time in Europe, Great Britain, with regard to boutique hotels who have no parking. Now, granted, there's a whole longer history there that we don't have to deal with, that we can't deal with because we were auto-oriented. But even right now in this country, there's a trend towards boutique hotels in urban centers. They don't have any parking. So there's trends occurring right now, and I think we should probably be more proactive than reactive to the past. We're not going backwards. We need to go forward. So that's basically my answer. All the numbers are lousy, but whatever number we select, we have to make sure it doesn't have unintended consequences. And I believe that going to anything above 1 will have unintended consequences far worse than what we're dealing with right now.
Okay.
It is now.
Well, we had a hard stop at 4 o'clock.
4:30, you mean?
Yes, sir? We're not voting per se, I don't think. All right, please come forward, but please be brief because we are going to adjourn. Good.
I'm Peter Follett, 353 Sturgeons Lane, Pasadena, Maryland. I'm the architect of the Bellhaven.
Yes, sir.
So just a couple of points of clarification so you know that there is a requirement in the current code for service. And the service requirement is 1 space per 200 square feet of service space in a hotel. That space is typically, or what we've been told, is for employees. Okay, so there is existing a requirement that covers employee parking. Not explicitly, but indirectly, okay? Second thing is, there's a requirement in the code for conference center parking over 5,000 square feet, okay? So in our submission, our conference center is 4,870. Okay, so we don't have any, but, so there is parking required for conference centers and meeting space in the current code. So it's not like there isn't any at all, right? Secondly is, or I'll just say, one other comment. I can't believe I agree with Mr. Strange. It's really enlightening to hear him speak today. We design hotels all over the country, and the trend is to, and most of them are in urban areas, okay, so I will say that, but the trend is to decrease the amount of parking, right? We just built a hotel in Washington, 235 rooms, 0 parking, okay? So, and I'm also a Delaware boy. I've been coming here since I was 9 years old, and, maybe 9 years old. So one thing that's interesting about Rehoboth, and because I do this for a living, I was interested in the code, the parking requirements for the code. They are not restrictive. They're actually pretty reasonable. And I would say that that's probably the reason why you don't have a lot of surface parking lots. And that is like this whole parking, no requirement under 15,000 square feet for retail space is, in my opinion, a stroke of genius, because it has allowed all these little shops to proliferate and not have to have parking, right? Second thing is, interestingly enough about Rehoboth Beach, I don't think there's a parking garage in Rehoboth Beach, right? There's not, that's like amazing to me, right? So I do think that there probably should be a parking garage. I think it's very close by, right outside this door, and it doesn't have to be very tall, but it could be something that could be paid for with a fund to hotels to offset some of the parking that seems to address some. Because I think there's a system here, and Michael is exactly right. It's a bigger issue, it's a bigger study, and I don't believe there's like such an immediate intense to solve the problem now. I would like, and I would urge that and it's great that the Planning Commission is actually thinking about planning the future for parking, right? So congratulations there. So I really think you all ought to take a deep breath, commission the right team to do it. My colleague here is exactly right. You need to get a parking/transportation consultant and really do it right for Rehoboth, because that's what it deserves.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
If I may, just to build on that, not only transportation and parking, but it's economic development. It's community development, it's it's your socioeconomics.
It's all the things.
It is a comprehensive analysis, because you can't divorce one piece from the other because of the constraint of the lack of availability of land. The pie's only so big.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Pardon me, I just want a second. I came here in order to determine when we're going to get our hearing. Last September is for the
Which hearing,
Bellhaven
sir? What
Hotel,
application?
The Bellhaven Hotel application.
Okay, what's your name, sir?
John, Papa John.
Okay,
And it was delayed from September to October. Now, we've gone through all these months waiting to be heard. Our problem is we have a variance. It runs out April 24th. Now, the reason I came, I wanted to see what happens, because I haven't been to any of these meetings for years. But I wanted to see what happens during the meeting. And one of the proclivities is, because you don't have a lot of information available, you tend to say, well, we got to study it, we got to defer it to the next meeting. But we are under a time constraint that the opinion we've gotten from the commission that granted the variance runs out April 24th. So we have to get on the agenda this next month and April and get a decision.
all right. Thank you, sir.
And so, well, I'm sorry to keep you any longer, but if we don't, then we're going to have to think about some other
Yes, sir.
option.
Yes, sir. Thank you. According to my watch, it's 4 o'clock. And unless I hear differently,
4 o'clock somewhere.
yes, yes, sir. I'm sorry, it's 4:01.
Well, I'm going to be very brief. One, as I often said when I was serving on the commission with Mike, he's spot on. I mean, I have absolutely no disagreement with what he has said, and I hope you all take it to heart, because this is really important. What you're talking about here has far-reaching unintended consequences in so many aspects of our life here. And I also have the sense that you may be seeking to impose on one segment of our commercial businesses here a solution to a problem that is not entirely theirs. And I think you need to look at the seasonality of this business when it comes to event space and everything else. And you need to look at the long-term effects of what your decision will mean versus what the city and the commercial businesses are trying to achieve, which is to encourage the use of public transportation and other means, for example, for employees to come into town. Rehoboth Beach Main Street is trying to work with the commercial community to find ways to encourage that and to facilitate it, because we recognize the problem that's here. And if you start trying to increase the number of parking spaces for employees in hotels, for example, at some point in time, you may need to require 200-300 parking spaces. I mean, it's not their problem to solve entirely. And so, I would also encourage you that when you make your recommendations, not to view them as simply a recommendation and let the Board of Commissioners deal with the problem and figure it out. You should have a strong conviction as to the rationale for the recommendation you're making to the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. I don't think we lack conviction. Having said that, I think we are adjourned. City Manager's Office, sir.